So while I'm working on this new offering, my body mapping video library, which I'm so excited about, I wanted to reprise some conversations that I had on the Brilliant Body podcast with some beloved guests, one of which is Karen Bellone. We had two long conversations actually about death, birth, and everything in between. She is a filmmaker, an artist, and a death doula, and has so much insight about these topics that we often avoid as humans. So here's the conversation we had, very much not avoiding that topic. It's very rich and interesting, and I hope is meaningful for you.
When we bear witness and hold space for someone who's in transition, whether it's a person who's giving birth or a person who's dying, our job is to be able to take in the stimuli, to take in the information at hand, to be able to serve the situation. And that's how we use this body then.
Hey folks, welcome to the Brilliant Body Podcast, a forum to learn about and liberate the brilliance of your body and ultimately to expand the meaning and experience of intelligence. Join me, Ali Mazet, and other body masters to explore pioneering and varied perspectives on what it means and feels like to be embodied. So many people feel disconnected from their bodies due to emotional or physical pain, or even conditioning and lack of education. Others feel quite at home in their bodies, yet want to learn to have more pleasure, awareness, and access to the body's guidance. This podcast is for everybody. Each one of my trailblazing guests has studied their own bodies and others' bodies for decades and will share their expertise and unique mission, how to thrive as a body. So join us and reclaim your body's brilliance. My next guest, Karen Bellone, MFA, is a certified end-of-life doula and death educator at the Seven Sense in New York's Hudson Valley. She founded Exit Strategy for Dying, reshaping the conversation around death and grief through arts and culture. With an extensive background in award-winning filmmaking and photography, Karen offers a unique perspective on end-of-life care, integrating visual and auditory therapies to support individuals facing mortality. Through somatic and sensory awareness, she employs various techniques like visual, sound, and meditation therapy to bring comfort and celebrate the life of each individual. Our conversation was so rich and relevant to the theme of my podcast that it naturally extended into a two-part episode. Karen graciously answered all my questions and more, prompting a deep exploration of topics that resonate with every human experience. Without further ado, let's welcome the brilliant-bodied Karen Bellone. Glad you could make it. I'm glad we're doing it today. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's I don't know, 2024 started off with a bang. And it's like already the end of February, and I'm amazed by that, to be honest. How about you?
I'm feeling and seeing my age today, which is actually a good segue into one of the several reasons why I wanted to invite you on the podcast, because wow, you run into your 60s and mortality becomes more and more of a prevalent concern, even subtle, if not vivid preoccupation at times, particularly once those of us who have lost both our parents, and that feeling of there not being kind of a ceiling on who's next. Of course, people can die at any time, but I just am so appreciative of the work that you're dedicated to doing with helping people not only have good deaths, and I do want to ask you about what that even means, but also to have good lives. And I would just love to know, first of all, why do you care so much about this? Hey, Kitty. Why do you care so much about this? And how is this your calling? Was it always a sensibility that you had very young? Or what happened in your life that drew you into taking care of this aspect of our existence?
Yes, to all those questions. I think it was always a part of my existence from very young childhood. I definitely had a relationship to spirit, which is not necessarily Thelma loves to be on camera.
I love how there's a black cat going back and forth in front of us,
I
considering that age-old symbol of death. That's fantastic.
we got the raven over here, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, well, I mean, let's just start from the beginning. I mean, yes, I've always had a relationship to death and also to spirit. And I would say that Edgar Allan Poe was one of the first influences in my life. And
Really?
therefore, the black cat is appropriate. But Poe, I believe, was a mystic and encoded a lot of very esoteric information into his very scary tales. So, you know, he was very smart about being notorious in a way and making the information encoded and titillating. So it would take a certain amount of focus and dedication to paying attention to what's in the words, what's in the work, in order for people to sort of get underneath the surface of it. Anyway, that's an aside, but I've come across other people in my lifetime that see that same thing about Edgar Allan Poe. So that's a side that most people don't even think about with him. Although I would say the French do. They
Hmm.
they kind of knew early on. Anyway, when I was 10 or so, that opened a door for me into a deeper thinking about life and death. I also grew up in a 21-room Victorian house with 3 generations of my family. And my uncle died very suddenly at 24 in a Jeep accident. And he stayed in the house. I was born 2 years later, and I used to play with him, with his daughter. And that was a given, and we didn't discuss it. It was just a given. So as I grew older, I realized that that was not something that everybody believed was a truth, not necessarily in my own family, but you were judged by other people if you discussed anything about communing with the spirits. So
Hmm.
it was only later on that I came back to that and realized that that is a deep truth, and that it's unfortunate that people don't cultivate that part of their existence while they're mortal. So that's kind of my backstory.
Wait, so does that mean from a very early age you had a lot less or no fear of death because you were able to continue to commune and even enjoy someone who had departed their physical form?
I wouldn't say that I have no fear. I think that I'm engaged with the mystery of it in a way that has always been there for me. And I have always been dancing with that to some degree in my existence, knowing that this is ephemeral, knowing that this is impermanent, and that there's a huge gift in living that way. But I would also say that, like yourself, I'm of a certain age now, and I am aware that my mortality is much more upfront and present. Although, you know, we have no idea when any of us are going to shed this mortal coil. But as you get older, you do the math and you realize, like, well, I can only have so much time left. You know, the thing about dying and approaching having a conversation with oneself about dying is that we live in Western culture in a very claustrophobic kind of thinking about mortality and what might be a greater story that we are within. And so there's not a lot of places to go to find information. Like I said, if you talk about spirit or about after death, people look at you like you're crazy. I mean, I think we can pretty much say that most people will, although the more you speak with individuals, the more you start to hear people's own stories of, I had a dream of, or I had a visitation from, or I've had this intuition, or I feel. So that's how I come to speak to you about this, because
Oh,
this is all body-based knowledge.
Well, I
So
just wanted to add that I have a farmer neighbor, for example, and he is absolutely clear that ghosts exist and he experiences them. And I don't think he would necessarily consider himself a mystic, but he does live in a rural environment in very old buildings. And yet his wife, who grew up a few miles away from him, has never had that experience and thinks it's a bit nutsy. So I just wanted to add, I think, of course, it depends on the culture you're in and also the area, the region, the family, whether religion potentially is influencing the allowance of those experiences as well.
absolutely, religion plays a big part in suppressing this conversation or looking at it from a very regimented and only one perspective point of view. But you bring up a really interesting point about your neighbor, because I wouldn't say that I knew this, but as I got deeper into this work, I started to see the relationship between memory, place, and nature. So once you start to allow yourself to perceive what is greater than us, or what continuum we exist within, which of course is nature, and place holds memory of the lives that have been lived there, whether it's a building or it's the land itself. And then, of course, there are all these different forms of memory. There's our individual memory, there's collective memory, there's ancestral memory. And all of these things are there to feed us if we choose to tap into them. And I think there's more information there for us that's not verbal. It's a remembrance. It's an understanding of something that's still held within these vessels, these mortal vessels that we hold, that are the shell, basically, for this lifetime. And that's one of the things that I try to really encourage people in my trainings, which I don't train people to become death doulas necessarily. My training is more about the work that I believe is inherent in being a doula and bearing witness and being present to accompany those who are transitioning in death. But I also see it as tools to live a much richer, a much more connected existence while you're here. So my thoughts are about the reciprocity of both sentience, which is the intelligence of this body connected with the mind, and presence, which is invisible, but we can be a container of presence. So it's learning how to relate to this vessel, this body, in ways that we are not normally taught to think about this body. And that's why I'm so attracted to everything that you're doing, and how I felt there was this crossover and connectivity between the work that you're bringing into the forefront and the work that death doulas are doing. It's very different, but we're both honoring and looking at the inherent power and knowledge that the body has. And this is, I think, very new and very ancient. It's new to modern culture because we've just been living in this part of our bodies for at least the last 100 or so years, or a few thousand.
At least in white culture, white Western culture anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. I think death in and of itself was very much a part of community. And that's the big part of the work that I do and what I've started in my part of the world here in New York, to create community around caregiving and death care, because on the medical front, this is turning into an epidemic. Like, we don't have a system to carry us, especially as the baby boomers are all dying and there's 75 to 80 million people going to die at the same time. We need some compassion and some empathy for ourselves. I mean, I myself, a woman living alone of a certain age, and I have a lot of friends like this, male and female, who don't necessarily have family, or they may have a child not living close to them. We are a generation that will fall through the cracks during the time that we're dying if we don't start paying attention to it. So that's like the cultural crisis we're in. On the other hand, in terms of the power of the work itself, many people wait very long. In fact, more than likely too long to be able to do the work they may want to do in clearing the path for themselves to let go of this body without regret or unfinished business or proper goodbyes for themselves, or whatever it is that we feel we need to sum up in our stories. And stories are a huge part of our lives, and we don't think of them that way, you know? There's the family story, which is often very complicated, as you well know. There's the narratives that we hold for ourselves as the stories we think are our stories. But as we're starting to shed this mortal coil, those stories start to fall away. Those narratives that we've told ourselves, they start to fall away. And the truth of our story starts to become revealed to us. This is a part of psychology and psychiatry that Erik Erikson coined. I believe it's the 8th phase of human existence, what he calls ego integrity versus despair. So there is a moment, and it could be the moment right before you take your last breath, but there is a moment where most of us want to make peace with something. And so the work of a death doula early on, if someone gets a terminal diagnosis, or somebody's perfectly healthy and they want to have a conscious death, and of course, this is much more of a Buddhist concept than a Western-based concept. But I am finding more and more young people, millennials and Gen Zers in this country, in America at least, I'm finding they want to engage in these conversations. They want to talk about it now because they want to learn how to live now under the duress that they are under on the planet. The planet is dying, whatever that means. The planet will more than likely go on. We may not. So I think we're in this cultural shift where there's not a lot of clarity or light necessarily yet, but since COVID, I've seen the playing field change in terms of what people are thinking about and how much more prevalent death, dying, grief, and loss are for people now, and what that means to their lives and how it lives within their bodies. This knowledge or this desire for more connectivity in the body.
Since you're still listening, you must already be sensing how much your body is shaping your lived experience. And that's especially true in our sexual lives. So many people are quietly struggling with things like libido, sexual shame, orgasm difficulty, or disconnection. And most of the advice out there stays in the head. But these patterns live in the body, so I created the Body Mapping Video Journey Library, guided experiences that help you experience yourself as a body in a completely different way and actually see what's shaping these patterns so you can change them. In about 30 minutes, using your innate language of spatial relationship, you'll map how you're living these relationships and walk away with clarity, relief, and a deep sense of agency. It's private, it's simple, it's affordable, and it works in a really different way than any approach that I know. So check it out at www.alimezui.com/body-mapping-journey-library, or scan the QR code and find out what your body knows with personal geometry. Yeah, the pandemic, it's interesting. Even if people didn't have close ones, loved ones die around them, it was a shock for all of us that life could be very different than we ever imagined possible, for sure. Even if we weren't particularly afraid of dying ourselves.
I
Did
was
you want
just going to say that I think one of the lessons learned during COVID that I'm seeing the results of now is not so much about people fearing. Yes, there was a moment where we feared we would die from COVID if we got it, but I think what it really brought up, and I saw this a lot in the news and in stories being told during this period of time, that people started to understand that grief is not just about losing someone to death, but grief could be about what am I losing right now in my existence? What have I lost? I lost this job. I lost this love. I lost my home. I lost, and that is grief. And we have no tools for understanding how to make it past those, what we like to call little deaths.
God, I just watched last night the SAG AFTRA Awards. Literally, tears were running down my face for 3 hours watching it because I was experiencing the grief of a path I didn't take. I acted for a while and I loved it and I had talent and skill in it. And my life branched off for a variety of reasons. And that's not the life I chose or that chose me either way. So I just wanted to add that grief often, as you're saying, can come with the path we didn't take, the path that didn't take us, things that we really, really longed for or thought we did, all these different things.
This
Yes.
is it's so basic to our human existence, not just our human existence, our being. Every being on this planet experiences grief too. We're not the only ones. This is the other thing that you start to really understand intrinsically as you start really being present for death, whether it's a human or another being. It's the same exact thing. We all experience grief. I would love for humans to really concentrate on that more because part of what I think starts to allow us to have a good death, which we'll get into because it's a very loaded phrase, is the idea that we are just these grains of sand, all of us. The ego makes us believe that we are it. But that's so much pressure in a way in our lives, pressure we don't need. And when we start to relate to the idea of like, you experienced that loss last night, you gave that up a long time ago. But that feeling is still very present when the stimuli occurred, right? And these are our stories. These are the stories that matter. This is the truth of who we really are. And it's not a terrible thing to embrace the fact that we grieve, that we feel loss, that we experience sadness, because then when we experience joy, we know what that feels like. It's not lost on us. You know, these elements of light and dark in our lives, they're crucial to us living really a healthy existence. And the body is the home of this mind, not necessarily the part of the brain that we think is the only part that's thinking. You know, nobody talks about sentience. Sentience is a huge
We
part.
do.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, sentience is the bomb for sure. I love this phrase and this concept. The loss isn't lost.
That's beautiful.
It is. It gives a sense of hope. Like loss isn't lost because out of any ashes, whether that is choosing a different career or a home burning down or the loss of a relationship or whatever, of course, opens different gains. And that is the experience on planet Earth. Maybe some other planet or some other plane, it is designed very differently. But here, wow, it is quite the path to have to constantly oscillate between loss and gain and loss and gain, and being able to get more skilled and aware of gain, which for some of us can be really difficult. It can be easier to keep the focus on what's being lost rather than what's being gained, which of course is what the practice of gratitude is all about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, really loving your body as the vessel, which I know so much a part of the work that you do in
I
healing people.
actually don't see it that way. You
Don't?
keep using that word. I do not. Which word? Vessel.
You don't see the body as a vessel.
No, I
How do you?
don't. Well, whenever anybody talks about a vessel or even a temple, to me, it implies a duality and a disconnect. It implies that something other than what the rest of us is this emptiness that we then inhabit or fill. For me, every cell is a vessel, perhaps, but to me, it's so infinite. If we have trillions of cells, every single one of those cells is a vessel, in my view, if you're going to use the word vessel. It isn't
I
just like
agree.
one vessel with something poured into it while we're alive. And I do think that the more conscious, the more sentient we are, the more we experience our sensational existence and our emotional existence and our energetic existence and all these different ways of sensing ourselves in intricate detail throughout our body experience, the more embodied or the more available we are, as Philip Shepard talks a lot about, to relating to the world.
I agree with you. Every cell is a vessel. Every aspect of what is alive while we are alive is terrain, essentially, for experience and sensation. I think of it differently only because in my work, I think of the body as a vessel and a container which holds the life force and the spirit, because
Mhm.
that is what leaves this body.
For
And
sure. I just see it as trillions of vessels rather than one. And therefore, it gives me a different sensation or understanding of that metaphor that I don't have when I hear the word vessel. So that distinction may or may not be helpful to people, but it's helpful to me when I'm wanting to feel more what I am as this.
I understand that. And I like this conversation because it really does open up the understanding. You know, words can be so tricky anyway, especially when you're talking about things that don't reside in a verbal realm necessarily.
And that have been systematically disenfranchised, systematically exiled, as the body has been, from our sense of identity and from our sense of existence, empowerment, wholeness, all these things. That's why it does matter so much, like the body versus the mind, or the body versus the spirit. It has definitely become almost demonized during many centuries, which I do think in part has to do with why people are afraid of death, because how a lot of religions have made us think of death through the use of language.
And of course, the constructs of religion and the ordered universe and the earthly plane,
Yes, yes.
is not a construct that really makes you feel warm and fuzzy necessarily as you're moving towards your demise. I think so much fear comes from those religious tenets that many people don't even, they just know the tip of the iceberg about certain ideas, and then that colors how they understand it. Oftentimes people will seek the help of a doula when they are given a terminal diagnosis, because suddenly they're thrust into that ego integrity versus despair moment like that. They could
Yeah.
be 35, they could be 85. It really is about the confrontation with mortality. So many questions arise then that don't necessarily, or they percolate in us and we suppress them more than likely. And when you're given a terminal diagnosis, the governor comes off of that, and you are in a space now that you've never wanted to be in, and you have no tools whatsoever. So I think that's a lot of where the fear begins. That's the existential fear part. Then there's, other more human aspects of the fear that arise. Of course, that's a lot of people think that's about, well, what did my life mean? How much money am I leaving? And that again is the tip of the iceberg, because that's also what we're taught to believe. That's our imprint, is how much we've left behind. What power or fame or success did we achieve in this lifetime? And yet again, those stories start to crumble and break away too, as our real selves are revealed to us. The mask comes off. I think that for me, this work really started. I lost my mother to cancer when I was 29, and that was way too young for me. I was not prepared in any way, shape, or form to exist without her yet on this planet. And that set my life into a certain spiral. Nothing meant the same to me. I was in a very big moment in my career. It was easy to just get lost in that and avoid the loss and the grief that was so overwhelming and destabilizing. But you can only push that down for so long. And so I think it pulled me onto this path eventually, having this relationship already to spirit and realizing I'm not good at science, but there's one basic tenet I do know, which I believe is Einstein, which is energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed. And that has been the overriding principle for me most of my life in many ways. I came to this work kind of through a back door. I've been a filmmaker and a visual artist my whole career. And I went to get my master's in my mid-30s through the Actors Studio in New York. And so in order to be a director in that program, I had to study acting, which was not something I necessarily wanted to do and I was deathly afraid of. But once I started learning the sensory work and the tenets of what they call the method, I realized that these are tools for humans to live a better and richer existence, that it's a gift for actors to work this way, but these are tools for everybody. And it was like primal therapy for me to learn about emotional memory, physical memory, and to find some methodology for things I already understood and knew. I had no idea that that's what acting would bring me to. So I give a lot of credit to Gary, who taught me the sensory work at the Actors Studio, because for me, that's still the foundation of how I try to help others learn
Yeah.
about being able to hold space for the dying.
I
You
love how you talk about that because while I was in the acting world, I always felt like it's a spiritual path. That was always my experience of it.
I think it is. I think it is. And I understand why the acting profession would like to keep that a little bit under wraps, because they'll get judged for that too. And a lot of people don't believe that's true. I put out a monthly newsletter called Exit Strategy for Dying, and I've been doing this since before COVID, which tries to demystify death by looking at death and dying and grief and loss through the lens of art and culture and music and poetry and innovation and storytelling, because this is how we make peace during
Hmm.
these lives with our inherent spirituality, our inherent humanity. We don't necessarily talk about these things. We have these baskets of religion and then mental processes and then what the body does, but it's really a continuum. These are not isolated parts of our existence. And art and culture, to me, have always been how the spiritual underpinning of our humanity gets put down on the ground here, That's what the artists are doing.
I love it. I totally agree with you. I'm
Thank
so
you.
touched and deepened by this conversation, Karen. And I'm so, so proud and gratified to be able to share this conversation with the world. So thank you very, very much for having it with me.
Thank you. Thank you for concentrating on this subject in the context of what you're doing. It's such a beautiful combination. And thank you for the work you do, because you're waking people up.
I hope so. Waking us all up before we We die, yes.
But
I
that's the birthright, isn't it? Like we should be living while we're living, not
yes.
waiting to this last moment when it's taken away from us. And then we realize I wasn't what I wanted to be. I didn't live in this body the way I wanted to. The time will pass. And so the idea of what you do is to give back this birthright to people that I feel has been taken away from us in modern culture. We're just not sensitized in this way.
The further removed we've become from living in and amongst the natural world and other beings, the harder it is to experience ourselves as part of the circle of life and death.
And to feel ourselves and our real truth. I think that's one of the reasons why there is so much grief and loss in the world. Personally, I think that's a big part of it. We can't touch it. We can't feel it. And what you're doing is helping people to come back to that truth of what is our birthright and what is our death right. Those things, that's what we are. We're held within those constructs.
I love that. I've never heard that before. Death right. So beautiful. That's a book waiting to happen.
There's a lot out there. There's The Rights of the Dying, which is a beautiful document. And there's so many amazing minds out there. And it gives me a lot of hope, actually, is the truth of it. This work gives me an enormous amount of hope, which probably seems antithetical to people, but it's not. It's not at all.
No, I think it's a very special sensibility that you have. And I can only imagine how blessed all the people whose bed you sat beside and how much better a death they had because you were part of it. So lucky them.
Thank
And
you.
lucky us for your being here. So thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope you're finding immense value in this conversation so far, but this isn't the end. Don't bury the conversation just yet. The second part of our chat with Karen Bellone is coughing up some fascinating insights. And don't ghost us. Join us in resurrecting this episode in part 2 as we discuss assisted suicide, good death, what people think about and talk about in their final moments, our experience with Alzheimer's and dementia, normalizing conversations around death, and so much more. I hope you join us for the second part of this wonderful conversation with Karen Bellone. And please forgive my millennial co-producer who couldn't resist slipping death puns into the copy. Thanks so much for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed this episode, please give that like button a little click. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've got a bunch of fascinating guests lined up with trailblazing experts in the field that I'm really excited to share with you. I'm eager to hear from you too, so don't be shy. Drop a comment below. Share your thoughts, suggestions, or just say hi. Your insights on this episode mean the world to me. So go ahead, spread some love. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, and share your thoughts below. Your support keeps this channel going strong, and I'm genuinely grateful for each and every one of you. Till next time, stay brilliant. I hope you found this episode inspiring. If you'd like to learn more about the many ways I'm encouraging and guiding the wider world to reclaim the brilliance of the body, please visit my website at www.alimezey.com. Thanks so much for listening. Until the next episode and beyond, reclaim your brilliant body. The Brilliant Body podcast was created by Ali Mazet. This episode was co-produced and edited by Ali Mazet and Florence Popoff. Thanks to Florence Popoff also for my social media management, and to composer Blair, Mr. One Man Band Wilson for my theme music.